Did you know that 1 in 4 Americans who are older than 45 years old take statin drugs? Or stated otherwise, 32 million Americans are on these cholesterol-lowering medications. Now, in this video, my goal is not to deter you from obviously your medication if you're currently on statins, because that would be very irresponsible of me, and by no way, shape, or form your medical doctor. So you always have to confer with your doctor. However, in this video, what I do want to highlight for you are some alarming statistics and revelations about statin drugs and whether you really need them or not. Now, this is especially important if you currently do not have heart disease but are potentially at risk for it. So again, we're gonna go over to the computer. I'm gonna show you some crazy stuff. I'm gonna draw out some more 4-year-old drawings for you and show you some really cool charts and graphs and stuff, and we'll make sense of this, and hopefully it will open your eyes once again to have a more informed discussion with your doctor about this stuff. Okay, so let's go over to the computer and let's have some fun. Okay, welcome to our second video. We're talking today about specifically about statin drugs and the big business which they entail. Again, we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about this whole cholesterol myth and heart disease and statin drugs and specifically what they do. So without any further ado, let's get settled in. Again, we're going to go for about 10 minutes and let's look at this. So first of all, as we talked about last video, heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the Western world, followed closely by cancer. And it's funny, it's not funny, it's sad considering how much money we've spent on both of those issues, and we've made very, very little progress. So it's obviously the stuff we're doing, we're not focusing on the right things. We're not climbing the right ladder. You know, we're doing a lot of stuff, but it's not the right stuff. Here is a graph. Again, I'm going to show you a lot of graphs and stats because I figure that's a very pictorial way of getting this stuff into your head and realizing how misled you've been by a lot of poor information, marketing, all that kind of stuff out there, especially by the big drug companies. So heart disease and stroke risk factors among adults. This is in New York compared to the US. So I don't really care about the New York compared to the US part. I just wanted to show you the risk factors for heart disease. And the big one, like the biggest one, is eating less than 5 fruits and vegetables per day. That's the biggest risk factor, 75%. Okay, right down here. That's crazy. So what does that tell you? If you did nothing else but just ate more vegetables and fruit, you would reduce your risk of heart disease. That is pretty awesome. Second big risk factor is being overweight or obese. That's no surprise. It's a risk factor for everything. Third risk factor is no moderate or vigorous physical activity. Now this is the key. The key here is moderate or vigorous. Guys, this is not about walking. Walking is not enough. Walking is the base minimum. It's like breathing. You don't think about it, you should just do it, okay? Walking should not and must not be considered exercise. Don't tell me you went for a 30-minute walk and that was your workout today. Unless that 30-minute walk was uphill with a 50-pound vest on and you were sweating and huffing and puffing, that is not a workout. A lot of research has shown why this is so important for all disease prevention. Now, the other thing here is high total blood cholesterol. As we've seen, this is a risk factor according to this. As we saw in the last presentation, that doesn't necessarily mean much. High blood pressure tends to be related to, obviously, more stress on the heart, so that's an issue. Cigarette smoking, very simple. Don't smoke, you reduce your risk quite significantly. If you have diabetes, obviously that becomes a risk factor. Now, the problem with statins, I'm going to show you some studies in a second, is that they have been related to a significant and in some cases 45% increase in the risk of type 2 diabetes. Okay, so that is crazy, and we'll look at whether or not you really have to be on statins. Again, I'm not your doctor. I can't tell you to go on or off medication. I just want to present evidence and information to you that I think you can discuss with your doctor if you're to have this conversation. Okay, so let's look at the fallacy of the irony of the US medical system. Okay, pharmaceutical spending per capita. We spend the most money, almost double of the economic worlds, more or less. Okay, we're spending 843, I believe that's $1 billion. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's crazy how much money we're spending. And if we compare that to like New Zealand or France even, that has much lower heart disease, we're spending way more money and we have terrible health. Okay, so obviously there's no correlation between how much money we spend on healthcare and the amount of health that we experience, because the healthcare system is not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system. Here's another interesting thing, annual number of physician visits. Now, I don't personally believe that going to your doctor more often is a good thing in terms of preventing or keeping you healthy. However, it seems that countries in which there are more medical visits to your doctor tend to be a bit healthier. So for instance, Germany has 7 annual visits, average per year. France, about 6.4. The median for the OECD countries, the developing world, is 6.4. The US is 4 visits annually. That's almost half of Germany. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, here's what I think this means. In the US, we spend a lot of money on healthcare. And at the same time, we're also looking at how do we churn patients out quickly. So you go see your doctor, it's in and out nice and quick. They don't want to see you more often because that basically wears down the healthcare system even more. So there's less incentive for you to go to your doctor, which means that there's, according to these stats, less likelihood that you might be a little bit healthier based on these countries that seem to exhibit better health, especially with heart disease, in relation to the number of visits they go to their doctor. Now, this is not to say that if you go to your doctor, it's not saying that by going to your doctor more often, you're going to be given medication which is going to help you stay healthy. I don't think that's what's happening here. Because on the flip side, if we look at the mortalities due to healthcare, this is 2006, 2007, the US has the highest rate, 96 deaths per 100,000 population. That's the highest out of any OECD country. So obviously the healthcare system, there's a lot of medical errors, a lot of mixed diagnoses, a lot of drugs that are prescribed unnecessarily, and it's causing huge problems in the US alone. I mean, it's very, very, very significant when you compare it to even the UK, which is the second. I mean, it's 83 versus 96. That's a huge difference. Compare that to France, it's almost half. Okay? So anyways, let's look at statin drugs. So statin drugs are things like Lipitor. These are specific drugs that I'm going to show you how they work in a second that block cholesterol in the body. They literally block cholesterol formation. And let's look at, so remember the last video where we talked about how heart disease pretty much we're not getting anywhere. It's getting kind of worse and the projections are even more morbid. So let's look at statin use in the past 30 years. This is from the CDC, okay? So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the yellowish green represents 1988 to 1994, the aqua blue 1999 to 2002, and the purple 2005 to 2008. Let's just look at 65 to 74 years of age, because that seems to be the group that's kind of most benefit to these medications, if at all, in men in this case. Almost negligible, almost nothing in 1988. Okay. In between 99 and 2000, 26%, and in 2005 to 2008, 50% of men older than 65, between 65 and 74, were on statins. That's crazy. That is ridiculous. Women, these trends are increasing as well. So what we're seeing here is essentially from 30 years ago to today, or to a couple years ago, we've seen an exponential increase in the use of statin drugs. The problem, though, is that we have not seen a correlating decrease in heart disease. Sure, cholesterol levels have gone down, but we have not seen a decrease in the incidence and death rates from heart disease. Obviously, these drugs are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Or they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is blocking cholesterol, but that's not the main issue with heart disease. So how does cholesterol work in the body? Okay, so here's how this works. In the cells, in your liver specifically, your liver has a sensing mechanism. So essentially what happens is that you have your DNA down here, and when your DNA senses that there is low cholesterol, okay, what it'll do is it'll secrete an enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase. This then stimulates a process inside the cell to create cholesterol. Okay? Now, that is essentially how your cells produce cholesterol, and it's a very beautiful process. It's a natural thing that happens. It's supposed to happen. But what happens is statin drugs cut this off. They cut off that communication. So even if the DNA says, hey, release this enzyme, that enzyme is blocked by statins. Okay, so statins come in, we'll just call this Lipitor. and it becomes a, oops, it's a good old little, there we go. Lipitor. There's some good 4-year-old writing for you. Okay, so that's how these drugs work. And that's why our cells dramatically drop the amount of cholesterol they produce, and therefore our total cholesterol in the blood is reduced. Now, the problem with that is that it's not really about total cholesterol in the blood that we really should be worried about. Because as we've seen, there's been studies where cholesterol levels of, let me just write this down, 150 milligrams per deciliter. That's kind of the optimal, according to a lot of the medical bodies, is 200. So they say if you're lower than 200, you can be much better off. But the problem is that there's been studies that have shown that this is actually not even true. If you have low cholesterol levels, you can actually increase your risk of heart disease. And in people on the island of Crete who have levels of cholesterol above 300, okay, they almost have no heart disease. Okay, so why does that happen? Well, in tomorrow's video, I'll share with you that information. So there's two. I'm going to give you some interesting stuff here. In most cases, actually, let me show you some studies here. So before we go any further, let me show you some studies with respect to the efficacy of these statins. First one is, I mentioned earlier, the statin use and risk of diabetes mellitus in postmenopausal women in the Women's Health Initiative. So this is the biggest health study of women pretty much of all time. They looked at 161,808 postmenopausal women between the ages of 50 to 79. Okay. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details. Essentially, the conclusion was that, I'm going to read it to you, statin medication use in postmenopausal women is associated with an increased risk for diabetes mellitus. And in this study specifically was a 45% increase. That's crazy. There we go. So, and then they finish off by saying further study by statin type and dose may reveal varying risk levels for new onset diabetes mellitus in this population. And this was 2012, okay, in the Archives of Internal Medicine. This is a huge finding, and this has been well known now, well known for more than a year. You may have heard this in the news. Taking statin drugs, if you're a postmenopausal woman, especially if you're a postmenopausal woman, increases your risk of diabetes significantly. Okay, let's look at another study. Are statins even valid for the use of primary prevention of cardiovascular disease? That means in people who are already at risk for heart disease, is it even beneficial? Well, again, let's look at the results from this one. Again, I'm just going to give you the conclusions here. Only limited evidence showed that primary prevention with statins may be a cost-effective and improve patient quality of life. Okay, this is the author's kind of reiteration of their findings. Furthermore, caution should be taken in prescribing statins for primary prevention among people at low cardiovascular risk. Okay, so not only did they find that it was somewhat ineffective for people at high risk, it should also be cautioned for people at low risk. Now, with that said, there's another, and again, this looked at a huge population of studies. They looked at 16 trials, 34,000 people. Okay. This next study was another meta-analysis. So they looked at 11 studies, and they looked at 65,229 participants, and they were followed for a number of years. And essentially the conclusions here were that the literature-based meta-analysis, so all these studies combined, did not find evidence for the benefit of statin therapy on all-cause mortality in a high-risk primary prevention setup. So if you had a high risk of cardiovascular disease, more than 11 different studies totaling more than 65,000 people showed that there was no benefit. In fact, the statistics was that 98% of the people in these studies had no benefit at all to using statins. I mean, I can show you more and more studies if you want to see this. This one here, published again in the Archives of Internal Medicine in 2006, again shown specifically with those, and here's a very important distinction to make, those who do not have cardiovascular disease. Okay, in this specific study, they looked at 42,000 and change people. In patients without cardiovascular disease, statin therapy decreases the incidence of major coronary and cerebral events. and revascularizations, but not coronary heart disease or overall mortality. So what that means is that if you go to your doctor and you have no risk for cardiovascular disease and you have somewhat elevated cholesterol levels and your doctor puts you on statins, you are not going to benefit. In this case, about 96% of the time, there's no benefit at all to the use of statins. And the problem with statins is that they are related to a host of side effects, including muscular cramps, muscular problems. Most specifically, they're related to a reduction in CoQ10, which is an important cofactor, enzyme if you want to call it that, antioxidants in the production of energy. So these are very, very important in the mitochondria of your cells for producing energy. And so if you are on statin drugs like Lipitor, you should be supplementing with CoQ10 or ubiquinone, which is the reduced and more effective version of that for your body. Okay, so that's really important to consider. So remember, it's not about total cholesterol. Total cholesterol has very, very, very little impacts on actual heart disease. There's other markers that are more important. And one of the things I want to share with you is that tomorrow I'm going to be sharing a video with you in which I start to really reveal these silent killers. It's not cholesterol, right? There are other things in your body that are causing a lot of problems. And I'm going to share those with you because I don't want to spend too much time in this specific video on that. I wanted to talk just about the statins here and give you some interesting things to consider with respect to that. But in tomorrow's video, I'm going to share exactly what you want to be looking for. And the real silent, there's two big silent killers when it comes to heart disease. And it has nothing to do with saturated fat and nothing to do with cholesterol, okay? You'll be blown away when you learn this stuff. I just want to finish by saying the only real people who need to be on statins, and again, check with your doctor, obviously, before doing anything, are people who have familial hypercholesterolemia, which is essentially 1 out of 10,000 people. In these cases, exercise and diet will not make any difference at all. So these are people who have cholesterol greater than 330 milligrams per deciliter, and in which case you definitely want to be in consult with your doctor, and statins like Lipitor, unfortunately, might be necessary in those cases. So once again, if you are on statins, you definitely want to look at supplementing with CoQ10 or ubiquinone, which is the very, very important because these will be very heavily depleted, especially if you're a little bit older. Okay, so if you're older than 40, 45, CoQ10 is going to be compromised big time. And the thing I want you to understand is that you can reverse heart disease and prevent it through diet and exercise alone. Okay, we've seen this in numerous studies. Hundreds of studies have shown this now. Just a couple things I want you to think about. Increase your intake of omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids increase HDL, which is the good cholesterol, and decrease LDL, which is the bad cholesterol. Very, very powerful. So whether that's krill oil or fish oil or algae oil, very helpful at doing that. We know that fish oil is very beneficial for reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. Second is to start increasing the intensity of your workouts. As I mentioned earlier, the lack of moderate to vigorous intensity exercise is a big risk factor for heart disease. So you need to increase the intensity of your workouts. And you don't have to do this every single day. It can be 3-4 times a week where you're getting a huff and puff on, you get a good sweat on, and that's very important. So anyways, in tomorrow's video, I'm going to go into greater detail about how you can reverse this stuff and really get to the nuts and bolts of what to do. Wow, right? Pretty amazing stuff, pretty crazy stuff. And I hope hopefully some of this stuff is not new to you. And if it is, then there you go, right? It's really important to know this information because the next time you go to your doctor and for whatever reason your cholesterol levels seem to be elevated beyond their quote unquote normal, you really have to look at some other things. So remember, cholesterol is not the bad guy necessarily. There are different types of cholesterols or lipoproteins which are a little bit more problematic, but not cholesterol itself. So again, I wanted to present this information to you because heart disease, as I said before, is the number 1 killer, not only in North America, but in the entire Western world. Every single developed nation, in every single developed nation, heart disease is the number 1 killer. Why is that? Why don't we see heart disease as the number 1 killer in developing countries? Why is that? Well, there's very simple reasons for that. And that's what I share with you in a lot of the information that I'm about to put out with respect to cholesterol and heart disease. So anyways, we've got another video coming out tomorrow, which will get to the cause of this. There's 2 silent killers that you need to know about that I'm going to reveal to you in tomorrow's video that are really important to understand with respect to heart disease and cholesterol. So if you want the truth about what's happening to your heart and what's not happening to your heart with respect to cholesterol, for instance, then you don't want to miss tomorrow's video. Again, if you have friends, family, colleagues, enemies who have heart disease or who are at risk of it, you need to share this information with them. It's really important that they understand. And if we can get more people informed about this kind of stuff, hopefully they can make better decisions and take action for themselves in a much more empowering manner. So again, thanks for joining me. I'm Yuri Al-Kaim, and stay tuned for tomorrow's video.